So now I'm going to show you how to do letter spacing in InDesign. So here I have my type, and here I have my heading at all caps, which we know we want to letter space a little bit. So you go up here and you'll see that there's two things. This is for kerning, which I'll talk about later, and this down here is letter spacing, the little VA with the arrow that goes side to side. So what you can see is you can increase or decrease the letter spacing here as you need to. And obviously we're not going to adjust the letter spacing here. If you want to do individual adjustments, then that's kerning, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, so the letter spacing is right here. And if you switch that to a serif, let's check Fenice here, then same thing, only perhaps a little bit more letter spacing to accommodate the serif. So now we're going to talk about some pretty detailed stuff with kerning, which is in InDesign the difference between metric and optical kerning. So you can see right now that I'm in this text, and kerning is up here and letter spacing is down here. So we're going to focus on kerning, which is right here. You can see the little slash between the letter forms, that's kerning. And you can see you have choice if you open it. There's optical and metrics, and then you can set it to 0, which is neither. It's sort of neutral. So I'm going to select everything. And just to show you, I'm going to select 0 kerning. You saw the characters expand a little bit, but you can also see that if I put my cursor everywhere, anywhere between any two pairs, you'll see that the kerning never changes. It's 0. Okay. Now if I select it again and I go back to kerning and I select metrics, well, you can see it squeezes in a little bit, and more importantly, you can see that it has, if I put my cursor between like the words open type, which it wants to treat as one title, all of a sudden you can see this -75, and that's a -75 kerning. If I put my cursor between these two characters, the U and the M, it's 0 because that's what it's decided it wants to be. If I put my cursor here around the hyphen, it's also 0. But if I kind of mouse around, you can see that it's picking both positive, which means kerning open, and negative, which means kerning tighter settings. So in InDesign, metric kerning is the option that is the default option for a particular typeface. In other words, the designer of this typeface, which we can see is Minion Pro, in part of designing the letter forms, after designing the letter forms, was designing the kerning tables that determine how all the characters and all the glyphs properly fit together. So it's sort of built into the design of each typeface. So there's a kerning table for Minion Pro, and there's another kerning table for Occiden's Grotesque, which I've used here. So that's metric kerning. Whenever possible, you should go with metric kerning because it's obviously the way that the typeface was designed to be used by its designer. However, you can choose optical kerning, and you can see it switch just a little bit, and that is another, that's sort of InDesign's guess at what the kerning pairs should be, that's not specific to the particular typeface. So it's pretty subtle, the differences in most cases, but that is metrical versus optical kerning, and in general, metric is what you want to choose, but optical is an option too, and if you want to just really go nuts, you can zero it all out the way I showed you at the beginning, and then you're on your own. There's going to be no kerning whatsoever. The other thing I want to show you, and I'm going to zoom in, is that you can kern anything by hand. So this kerning looks pretty good, but let's say I wanted to tighten a little bit between the O and the P. I would put my cursor in there and I would hand kern. So there's a couple ways to do it. I can kern by clicking this, and you can see it's closing up, and I'm very, very tight there. I can do the same and open it up. And then it's very, very open. And there's a keyboard command which I can't show you on the screen recording, but it is Option and then the arrows, the left and right arrows on the keyboard. So I'm going to click Option and left arrow, and I want you to keep your eye right up here in the kerning window, and you can see that it is tightening. Now I'm going to click the Option open arrow, and you can see that it's loosening. So in things like headings, you don't want to be dealing with hand kerning in body type because that's a nightmare, right? You've got thousands and thousands of combinations. But in display type and headlines, things like that, it is perfectly reasonable and sometimes desirable to go in by hand and just do a little bit of adjusting. Especially, let's say I wanted to have punctuation here, and as we've already discussed, it needs a little kerning, so it's just easy for me to use the keyboard and just open that up like that. Sometimes you want to kern a little more finely than InDesign's default will let you do. So, for example, on this one, if I am using that option right arrow kerning, and you can see up here that it's kerning up in intervals of 20 units, which is a lot, and sometimes you want to have just more fine control. So in that case, you go under InDesign Preferences, and you look for units and increments. And then down here you can see that it's preset to 20 units per a thousandths of an M, and that's a very an M comes from metal type, and it is the measurement of the width of an uppercase M, and that's sort of a standard. An M is a standard unit in metal type that's sort of translated over to digital type. In any case, the kerning and the tracking is set, I think, by default to 20, so you can go ahead and change that to anything you want. If you want fine control, I'm going to change it to 5. Now, if you keep your eye here on the kerning, and I'm going to use my option right control, now you see it's going up by units of 5, which is much more reasonable for very fine control. So that's something to consider if you're going to be doing a lot of kerning in display type and you don't want to make really big changes, then you can go ahead and change the preferences, and it will remember that for that document.